Hello and welcome to RuggaMatrix International, episode 234. I'm your host, Juro Sen, and this is Ben Kimber.
G'day, Juro. How are you, buddy?
Very good. I've been on the road for the last few weeks and out in the bush of Australia, so we're fitting the show in when we can, and I'm on the road again for the next few weeks. But Ben, before we waste any more time, let's get straight into it. And what is the strike issue of the week?
Strike issue of the week, Juro. I want to preface it by saying that I am super excited for Super Rugby, okay? I'm ready to rock and roll, but I am going to put the boot in a little bit. So before I say that, though, I want to say how excited I am.
Any other way.
But I am ready to actually get into rugby, get it back full-time, have it back on my TV every weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and a lot to talk about.
It should already be.
It should already be. There is a bit too much, but you know what I mean. The week in and week out.
Six Nations.
The grind is the wrong word, but I want to get that rhythm back of our Super Rugby.
So what is the strike issue of the week?
Strike issue of the week is what's going on with the structure of rugby. And I'm particularly going to talk from an Australian perspective, but I think it's the Southern Hemisphere really that we're talking about. And the reason I bring it up is because we had some of our viewers out there talking about the Brisbane Tens. We had the Sevens a couple of weeks ago. There's a story floating around Australia having a state of origin game, and this all as we're supposed to be focused on running into Super Rugby season.
I'm looking forward to this. There's a lot I'd like to get my teeth into too.
There is, and I think what it does is also it touches on something that you and I and Cano talked about in our last show. Now, Brendan Cannon, for those who didn't catch the last show, a member of the panel now, and I think he might be back for our next show.
Be back for the next show.
But we did talk a little bit about the structure of Super Rugby, and to be honest, I watched the Brisbane Tens, enjoyed it. I watched the Sydney Sevens, enjoyed parts of it. The state of origin thing, I think it's a distraction. But I think the big problem for us is we don't have that regular season competition that gets in the brains and the minds of the Australian and New Zealand public enough for a long enough period of time. And I say this cognizant of the fact that in Australia in particular, the two biggest codes that we're up against are AFL and NRL. And they've got their 26 to 30 weeks of, you know, it's on, it's in prime time every weekend. Every time you turn around, there's a game that's worth watching. Whereas we roll into a shorter season, heading into international season. It's on at 2 in the morning. There's some team called the Sunwolves. We talked about the fact that the Super Rugby structure isn't right. And it galls me to see all these conversations around whether 10 should be a competition, whether origin should exist, how much attention we should give to sevens, when I don't think the main course of rugby for us, and that's got to be a provincial competition. I love my test rugby, but it's got to be a provincial competition that gives us longevity, and as Cano said last week, gives us enough good quality content to stick that foot outside the tent.
Yeah, really high quality regular content. I want to pick up on a few things you've mentioned. Brisbane Tens, didn't watch it, didn't care about it. Really not interested in it. Next thing, Sevens, yes, it's part of the game. It was pretty exciting, saw bits of it, like it. The state of origin content for New South Wales and Queensland shows the game is broken. This is a ridiculous idea for this point because the states play in a provincial competition. So to break it down into where they're from isn't going to work. And what are you going to do with the players from the Brumbies, etc.? You know.
Well, tell me this, Juro, how you can have these two conversations going on at the one time, where you've got Rupa and the RU and these talking about how our 5 Super Rugby teams, and you know they're the right number of teams, and it's great to see. And then say we're going to have a state of origin competition between Queensland and New South Wales. Yeah. It just beggars belief. And that's actually going to roll me into someone else. I'm going to have a crack at an Australian legend in a second. But the discussion around the number of teams for us, now that the rumours at the moment around what SANZAR are going to do with Super Rugby are coming out. A few press reports saying it looks more likely that Australia's going to lose 1 team and South Africa's going to lose 2 in some sort of new structure for Super Rugby. Now,
good idea.
I think it's a good idea to trim back. I don't know if trimming back to keep this fully stretched Southern Hemisphere competition is the right way to go. I'd rather see it
That's a bad idea.
Yeah, I'd rather see it trim back to a more localised zone, a zone for Australia and New Zealand and potentially one other team, maybe 4 Australian, 5 New Zealand, 1 extra 10 team, and another zone, South Africa, Argentina. Have a bit of a look at that structure and see how those 2 zones might play a longer season, getting plenty of games in prime time in their zones, and then meeting together in some sort of a final series.
Yeah.
But the Australian legend I want to have a crack at is Wallabies assistant coach, Brumbies coach Stephen Larkham.
Sacrilege.
One of my favourite ever players, right? But I was talking before about the contradictions that I see out there. Now, Stephen Larkham's been out there and quoted as saying that 5 teams is right, alongside with Rupa. And you can get it from Rupa, right? They've got players who fund them and they want to have more professional players,
they
right?
want jobs.
That's right, they want jobs. But Stephen Larkham said 5's right. But, the Brumbies have also been under the pump a bit the last couple of years financially. Off the field, looked like a bit of trouble for them. Stephen Larkham was going all right. He's still a rookie coach to my mind. Had a rough end of the season last year. But then Larkham also came out recently and said there aren't enough Super Rugby ready players in Australia for him, which is why he's looking at a guy called Waranui Hawera from New Zealand. And thanks Dave Goodenough from the Kahu crew called out one of the guys to watch for us. And also he talked about 43-year-old Andrew Walker as a potential 5'8". So how you can say 5 teams is right, but on the same hand say I can't find any 5'8"s, I don't understand.
Just on Andrew Walker, I've called him the last few years. Everyone's surprised to see him pop up with the Tens and play so well. But I can tell you, Ben, I've been calling him for the last 5-6 years on the LS7s for NITV. And he hasn't changed a bit. He's still as ripped as he's always been. He is a phenomenal athlete. And he can school most fly halves in Australia in an instant. So I'm not so don't be surprised. I'm not surprised by seeing Bernie Larkham so interested in him, because I've watched him and he's still got it, 100%.
Mate, phenomenal player,
Yeah.
and reminds me of some ways, not just because he's an Aboriginal guy, but of the Ellas. The way the Ellas always used to say, people would say, "Oh, what natural talent," and it would give Mark Ella the shits, and he'd say,
Yeah,
"Listen,
a fair bit of work
we
to do.
train a lot to get this good." And it reminds me of Andrew Walker because he always looked so effortless.
Yeah.
He looked so superb out there on the field. But as good as he might be at 43. You'd be hoping that there's a 21-year-old fly half who's coming through for Australia who'd be looking for that slot in the Brumbies, as opposed to a bloke who, as good as he might be, is surely, finishing up.
Well, my thoughts. I think there are too many teams in Australia because we don't have that elite talent good enough to compete on a weekly basis in the Super Comp, as well as feeding into the Australian team. And I would prefer to see 3 teams. I would love to see Super Rugby actually be 10 to 12 teams. That's it. 10 ideally, and probably just make it Australia, New Zealand.
Well, you can see 10, I reckon, 4 Australian, 5 New Zealand, and 1 other, potentially Japan, right? Maybe the Sunwolves would be stronger in some way if we got it that way.
But and this is not to dismiss South Africa, because I love the fact that South Africa plays in the competition, but maybe there is a way of doing a split
couple
group.
of zones.
Yeah, a couple of zones. But because South Africa adds a great element, and that's that beauty of touring that we want to see as well. So just a couple of teams each, the super teams playing against each other in a true super competition. I'd like to see that, Ben, because that means we'd have home and away and a really high level, just under test level, maybe even greater than test level for some of the games.
But also all those games in prime time hours in the zone they're in for a more extended period. And instead giving more of that quality content that as Cano wanted, put a bit outside on free-to-air TV.
And you build these rivalries up. So Australia's the worst out of all the countries in terms of getting to know foreign teams. Like the Australians don't care enough in a mass market. The rugby smart people who listen to our show, who watch our show, no problem. But you want to try and drag in more bodies to the stadium, and that's the problem. And the real issue is they know who South Africa, the Springboks, and obviously the All Blacks are, but we need to drag them in for the teams like the Stormers, or the Sharks, the Lions, etc. So I think the tightening of the comp would be fantastic, but it's like the genie's out of the bottle. So reining it all back in is going to be difficult, because once you've had a taste of Super Rugby action, you're not going to give it up.
No, it's going to need leadership. Now, before we go into getting into some of the rugby that's been played, and we're going to do a big Super Rugby run through of the teams at the end to talk about who we think might be the goods this year, I want to be controversial 2 more times for you. All right? My first one
You just turned up here. That's controversial.
I'm ready,
enough.
mate. I'm ready for a big season. The first one I want to say is I think that 5 is too many teams in Australia. So I'm going to ask you a question.
Agreed.
Who are you going to dump?
Western Australia
Yeah.
and Victoria.
Oh, you're going to dump both? They're back to 3 again.
Yeah.
You think 3 teams?
Yeah.
Really? All right. I like 4, and I was going to be controversial and say I think the Brumbies have got to be under the pump, right? Because if you're going to...
Well, the original plan was to move the Brumbies down to
South,
Victoria.
right? Yeah.
So they can play that roving game.
Yeah. Well, see, I think I like to keep Perth because it lets you have more time zone options within our area, right? You can get a 5:30 game, a later game, all that kind of stuff. New Zealand through to Perth gives you a nice block of time. But I think Brumbies in
but that's putting logistics before a decent environment.
but I think if you split the players out and you get those 4 stronger teams, I think they'll do better than they are now, right? The Force have struggled, the Rebels have done okay. The Brumbies have gone well with those players. If you were just purely unpolitical about it, if you just said where would be the best place for the strongest teams, you'd go for the bigger population bases and the time zones.
True, but the Brumbies and the ACT is true rugby territory. There's no doubt about that. And having been down at the Snowy Mountains recently, it's everywhere.
Yeah. Oh, I love my trips down the highway to Canberra. Don't worry about that.
And the rugby's strong in WA as well. But we're going to make a call here, and my call is 3 teams, and I think that traditional base is where it is. Maybe spreading the Brumbies down to Victoria. Okay. Perth would be great. But something's not right there. It's been there for some time. It took a long time for the Western Force just to win a game. Yeah. And they've had a lot of talent there. So, and there have been problems with the coaching staff over the years. It hasn't gelled with the team. So, and of course the initial signing of firepower didn't help and causing drama. So, ideally you'd love to have teams in every capital city, but we're just diluted.
We're not there yet.
Too much.
The final controversial point I'll make is I would actually sacrifice some test rugby for a better, longer, stronger provincial competition.
So would you get rid of the June series?
Probably. Yeah. I'd probably look at the November series and the Tri-Nation Rugby Championship as that. I'd probably say, look, the reason the World Cup is so awesome is because it happens every 4 years and the anticipation is wonderful. And I think because of the limited nature of the provincial game that we've had, they've been looking for more dough all the time, right? And the easy way is to throw a international in and bring a couple of $1 million in the door. Yeah. And I think you want to get a better baseline, a better core provincial competition that enables you to get that solid base, and then it's all cream on top when the Wallabies play, as opposed to, or the All Blacks, etc., as opposed to more tests.
All right. So did you want to talk about the Tens in particular?
I did. I want to talk through some of the rugby we saw over the weekend.
So let's go through to the...
I'll try not to bore you with it because you said at the top of the show you're not into the Tens.
Yeah. I was at the original Ballymore Tens, and that was a long time ago before Super Rugby started. So it's not a new idea, but obviously they tried to get some interest in it. But you're never going to get the Super Rugby provinces committing talent that is worth a lot of money with the risk of injury so close in an experimental competition like that.
Yeah, look, it's always going to be a sideshow, but it's a nice sideshow, right? It's a great little entree, a little bit to get you started at the start of the season, particularly if, and the difference, and I read a few commentary pieces around this that I thought were good. I saw one ridiculous story that said no one was there, because they can't obviously look in the shade and see where the crowds are actually sitting.
Crowd was disappointing though.
It was not as big as you would have thought, but it wasn't as bad as it looked.
The problem was it wasn't big as they bragged it was going to be. That's the issue.
40 degrees heat, mate.
So it's
I dodged the Sydney Sevens for the same reason.
You're soft.
Right?
So Cano said you were soft last week.
He did. He had a crack at me, Cano. I've got to get back at Cano. But what I did want to say was I thought I enjoyed it as a concept, right? Probably more than I did Sevens. And part of it is because they were bigger names and it was that entree to Super Rugby in some ways. We saw some guys like Sean Stevenson for the Chiefs and a few others that we think are going to pop up in Super Rugby and be something. Because there was 10 of them, and Liam Messam, and by the way, lovely tribute to Sione Lauki in the Chiefs winning, and you could see Liam Messam how choked up he was that he played on for his mate. A big loss there for the former All Black.
What a shock! What a shock! Yeah. And as usual, it's like we're doing a farewell to someone every week now. Yeah. It's just tragic.
It's not great.
But to family and friends, and to our friends in New Zealand, we obviously send our best wishes.
Yeah, absolutely. But one of the things that I saw Liam Messam say after the final when they'd won it was he said they started the tournament poorly. He said because they thought they had to play like sevens, but they actually had to play more like 15s. And that was what I liked about it. It brought a little bit more of the physicality and the set piece back into the game, but it kept up a high energy as well. So I think I preferred the 10s to what I normally see in sevens. And I'd say if you're going to have one of these satellite tournaments, it might even be better at giving you that feel for players who are going to make it and give you more of what rugby's great at, which is people of any shape or size can play. Not quite the case, but you can still have those big boppers running through.
I'm going to say to you, well, you may as well go ahead and play 15s in the end and have a lash and just maybe loosen up a couple of laws to make it more free-flowing or make it shorter.
Yeah, but for, for a 2-day tournament as an entree to the season, I quite thought it was all right. I didn't mind.
Yeah, fine, yeah, absolutely. But you're not going to get all the players playing. That's the thing.
Couple of things to call out from the tournament. I love Jacques Potgieter. They call him Jackpot on the commentary. He was wild, dancing around with his stereo, trying to get people revved up. I like that you see a little bit of different than your normal rugby in these tournaments. Sean Stevenson, I mentioned, the Bulls guy Hoytmar, who was another big bopper running around. Geordie Barrett's chip and chase try. Like, there's a Barrett farm in New Zealand somewhere they keep turning these blokes out of, but he looks fantastic when I talk about him in the Super Rugby. And what about Tong and Thor's brain snap, for those who saw that? Wound up, smashed into Liam Messam, and then threw a little headbutt, and he misses the opening round of Super Rugby. Clearly a talented kid, but he's got to get his head screwed on right, and I think, up there at the Reds, they've brought a few old heads in. Maybe that'll be good for him.
That's an early lesson, isn't it?
Yeah. But you got to like the look of that bloke.
Yeah. No, he goes all right.
So that's all I want to say on the 10. Should we get into Six Nations?
Yeah, the Tens is over, so who knows if it'll be back. There was a talk about it going to New Zealand.
Swapping with the Nines, they
yeah,
reckon. The Rugby League Nines coming over to Brisbane and the Tens going to Auckland.
Yeah, like it was no doubt great fun, Ben. But I just there's so much to do and cover in life, and I'm just keen to see Super Rugby and Six Nations and the Premiership and everything else. So I just didn't have time for the Tens the weekend. Sorry. All right, let's move on.
All right. Six Nations, England, Wales. Now, we talked about, I just got to throw back to show
England again.
Yeah, England again, mate. They're still winning, and that's all they need to do.
Yep.
We talked with Cano last week around that, getting the game moving, the right structure, getting the foot outside the tent, etc. 9.3 million viewers for that game. I saw my English journo mates tweeting about, and England had a training session this week, and they had 12,000 at the training session to watch England train for the Six Nations. Yeah. Something is going so right in European rugby, and it's fantastic to see. To the game specifically,
that doesn't happen without the okay from the coach either. Sort of stuff. And having worked with Eddie, I know he'd be integral in that. So
he's great at promoting too.
And he's really whipping up that excitement for the England team. Yeah. And it doesn't have to be pretty; they just have to keep winning.
Yeah. And it just reminded me, actually, that the tweet I saw about that was from Mick Cleary, who's a great rugby journo at the telly in London. And the point he made was rugby has free to air and cricket doesn't. Cricket isn't getting that sort of a viewership, and that's going to affect the game, which is what the discussion we had last week. And Lawrence Hooper on our Facebook page made that point to me as well, highlighting that UK cricket has that issue of they sold it all to pay TV and they aren't quite getting the reach, and kids aren't seeing it as much as they would like them to see. To the game specifically, it was a great game, I think, in terms of it was tight, it was suspenseful, they were both hammering at each other. I don't think it was the most creative game of rugby I've seen. I think we saw two teams, I think Wales looked the more creative. It's the kind of game where I think if you're a Welsh fan, you could feel a little bit robbed that you didn't get away with it. England were just very focused, had a very tight defensive line, and they smashed away and had their heads in the right place to keep their team line intact. Big, long periods where Wales were hammering at them and getting nowhere. Guys like Launchbury standing up, Joe Marler standing up, Courtney Laws, Atoje, really had good, strong, solid games. And Wales, the amount of times they smashed into a white wall, I thought was amazing.
Yeah, and England's desperation several times was amazing. There was an extraordinary amount of recycled ball too for England that led to that try. The closeness of the game is a result of England holding on just tenaciously. Yeah. And I think that's what makes them a winning team. That's a culture that Eddie's bringing.
Yeah, and I remember actually when I covered the 2003 England team around Australia, I travelled with the English team for 8 weeks, and I wrote one article that a bunch of the other English journalists, they took a quote out of because they used it to say the Australian media thinks England can do this. And at the time I said England looked like a team that doesn't know how to lose. Now I don't think this England team are quite there yet, but clearly they're in a mindset where they always think they're in it, and that is a big win for a team to think that they are always going to be in a game, even up to the 8th minute. And you saw that late try, across to the left-hand side of the field, and the celebrations at the end of the game for the English were massive.
Good try, and also the impact of Ben Teo. He's really starting to show how invaluable he is coming into the side. So Eddie Jones loving the fact he could unleash the former NRL star.
Yeah. Now, we've got to talk about the 38th minute Wales try. I think a couple of viewers asked us, particularly for you, because you always love to talk about your decoy runners. So that try in the 38th minute, it put Wales in the front at half-time, 13-8. I'm going to start by saying I thought it was superb. I didn't have an issue with it, but it was beautifully constructed. Scrum about 10 or 15 out, maybe about 10 or 15 in from the side. I'm going to talk in the numbers rather than the names so you know if you don't know the team. But the Welsh 9 popped off the back of the scrum before the ball came out. The 8 picked up and threw it to him, so he was already standing at first receiver, and they already had that extra man against the English defence. But the way they stacked it up was beautifully because the blindside winger, the 11, came strolling in behind the 9, right behind him, ready to roll. And just off the outside, the 13 was there, and the 10 was stacked behind him, and the 12 was a bit further out. And then the 12 ran this beautiful charging line into the 9 to cross over as the 13 and the 10 trailed forward. But the 11 just appears behind the 9's shoulder, little short pop ball, and straight through to the post. I loved it.
Yeah, it was a wonderful angle for the final try. Yes, so I have a bee in my bonnet every week about decoy runners that are thrown out a couple of metres ahead. This wasn't the case for this try. This try...
There we go.
Well, you can have decoy runners, but don't have them standing in the defensive line's way when it becomes an impediment to them doing their job. Because to me, that is lazy tactics. Let's throw 3 of these guys out. Hope the referee says no obstruction. But this was a case that was all happening before the gain line, and that's the clever play. The best tries force the opposition defensive side to make a decision before they hit the gain line. And that's what the Welsh guys did. It was a phenomenal try, and that is when decoy runners are done right. There was a move that I did as a youngster. There was a rugby league move that I introduced into rugby. It was called shuffle. I learned it as a 16-year-old, Ben. It's so complicated, I can't remember all the moves here, but I'm going to produce it on an animation, because whenever we did it, we scored. You could not defend against it. It was all done behind the gain line. So this is what I mean. The clever teams can do that. And it was a beautifully worked move. And you've got to celebrate those ones. So well done to Wales. That was totally legal as far as I was concerned. And it was a brilliant execution as well.
And you've got to love it too, because we had Cano last week talking about that line out, the Scots line out, I think, where the centres stood at the front of the line.
Don't you love that?
And it just the change up in the head. So to see the Welsh line out with their normal guys mixed up in where they stood, standing behind each other, it just puts something different in the English line's head. But then poor old Joseph, the English centre, had 3 or 4 blokes he had to think about trying to take. And it's a training park move they would have practiced and just executed.
And anchored. Yeah. Like England were left anchored, wondering what to do. So that was superb. I mean, Eddie would have thought, he would have been sitting out, good work. He would have loved that try for sure. Yeah, that's right. And I think other teams will be going, okay, let's put that in. And because it's not a copyrightable work when it comes to rugby, so I reckon that move's going to pop up in other games.
It'll pop up in schoolboy rugby, I know that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And don't worry, Australian schoolboy rugby have been the source of some fantastic moves in the past. So I love it. Got my tick of approval. Decoy tick of approval.
Wouldn't make the decoy run a show.
Thanks guys for leaving the message on it was a YouTube message, I think.
I think it was.
And we appreciate those as always, and we'll try to follow them up every week. But I was going to address that, and Ben said you have to address it, and I did.
Mate, I want to go fairly quickly through Ireland, Italy, and France, Scotland, because there's a lot to talk about with the super teams. Ireland, Italy, really disappointing to see the old Italy turn up. In the first 10 minutes, Ireland came out and bashed them, and they were no good for the rest of the game, essentially. CJ Stander, one of the games for the ages, scored 3 tries, was everywhere on the park, but actually Gilroy, I think, was the replacement, Gilroy, who also scored a hat-trick. He came on the field late, scored a hat-trick. CJ was directly involved in setting up 2 of those tries. He put the kick downfield for one of them, and he drove through the line and almost scored himself for his 4th before he made the space for the ball go wide for another one of Gilroy's. So CJ Stander, outstanding. He slipped. The Irish back row, you've got to think, is going to have a big show in the Lions tour, which everyone wants to know about. But really, Ireland, the wrath of Ireland after losing early on, I think, came back and bit Italy.
Yeah. It certainly did. And interesting with that big win, Ireland sitting second after match day 2. They're on 6 points and trail England by 2 points. And so that bonus point was pretty important with all those tries. The bonus points. Interesting what our viewers think about that in the Northern Hemisphere. Les Kiss, when he was on this show, loved the fact that the Six Nations was just a pure test match.
First past the post.
Yeah, no bonus points. So after a couple of matches, tell us what you think on the boards.
Well, is it mathematically possible that England could win all their games, get no bonus points, and Ireland could go close with bonus points?
Yeah, probably.
I better check that before I say it.
Do the math.
But imagine that. There could be some controversy here. Let's have a look.
Yeah, I love it. So, good win by Ireland, but not unexpected.
Yeah. Finally, France, Scotland.
Scotland.
I think the biggest Scottish rugby fan in Australia is sitting here right next to me. A pretty
I love
good
Scotch whiskey.
A pretty good bashathon. I don't think the quality was outstanding. I saw some nice moments. I think you in particular, you liked one of the Scottish tries.
Oh yeah, the second try that was on the chase down the right hand side. Bounce.
Kick through, winger picked it up, and the trailing replacement.
Yeah, the replacement, number 19.
Yeah.
Was a good offload that set it up as well. Yeah. Wonderful work by the Scottish, and I thought they played what was in front of them there. The first try was very good as well, but the French were denied a try too.
That looked a bit rough,
with a slap down. And look, if you slow, this is a problem with super slow-mo shots in rugby. If you slow a shot down enough, there's going to be loss of contact at some point. But in the old days, that would have been a slam-down try. So it didn't make a difference for France in the end, but it could have.
I think 22-16.
Yeah, so I think you had some money on that. So I think the issue is when you do the TMO review, do not review it as if we're all living in the slow-mo world.
Yeah.
All right. If it's clearly going to come clear of the hand, then it's no try. But I thought that was France being ripped off. But Scotland, again, impressive. They should hold their heads up high because taking on France in France like that is not an easy task. So I thought they were pretty solid. But it wasn't the greatest game, but there was still some high moments in it.
Yep. Fair enough.
All right. And they're on 5 points too, Scotland.
There you go.
So it's England 8, Ireland 6, Wales 5, France 5, Scotland 5, and Italy 0. So still in it. All right. Next.
Speaking of bonus point competitions, here comes Super Rugby.
It's built on it. All right, Super Rugby. So Ben, you've gone through them comprehensively.
I have.
We've got about 12 minutes to go.
We haven't got a lot of time to go into each of these teams, so
Get cracking.
I would love to see some comments and discussions on Facebook and in YouTube. I want to hear from you which teams you're tipping to go well, which players we've got to keep an eye on because we don't know all the squads the way you guys in South Africa do, the way you guys in New Zealand do. So I want to know who to watch, who to keep an eye on, and who we should be talking about each week. So keep those comments coming, guys. I want to get into the New Zealand teams first. I've gone through this in alphabetical order. On New Zealand first, we'll go to Australia second, South Africa third, and then the other two teams. The best. I don't bet a lot on rugby, right? But the best bet I had last year was I backed a New Zealand team to win the Super Rugby Conference, and of course they got there in the end, the Canes.
That's a big risk. Betting on New Zealand.
Just betting on the conference, right? Someone from that conference to win, right?
Yeah.
And I think this year again they look too strong. You've got to expect that they're going to come from there. The Lions have got a better draw in South Africa than they did last year. But I think the strength is going to be in New Zealand in Super Rugby again. To go quickly through the teams, I'm going to start with the Blues. Tana Umaga, by all reports, has them in a good headspace, and he's recruited pretty well. They've got the usual suspects: Jerome Kano, Patrick Tuipulotu, Sonny Bill Williams, depending on when he starts coming in. I think he's a great addition to the team, regardless of his on-field, but off-field, he's a big presence to bring on for them. So hopefully he gets in there. Pulu coming over from the Chiefs into the scrum halves, and Enrique Ione. They're a bit of a value bet for me at a 15-1. I think they could be smokies. I'm not entirely sure Pulu and West in the halves will be solid enough to get them through a full year of Super Rugby at the top of their game. That to me is potentially one question, but I think they're a very solid team.
Don't worry about the pronunciation and corrections this week. We'll go next week, but keep going.
Yeah. The Chiefs, they've got a lot to play for with Cruden and Coach Dave Rennie both off. I think there's a real emotional year for them. That we saw that emotion in the Tens with Liam Messon, Cruden, Retallick, Leonard Brown, Kerr Barlow, Sam Kane, Damien McKenzie. A lot of quality, and I'm a big Chiefs fan, have been for years. I like the way they play, and I think a few New Zealand reports I've seen are tipping them to come about fourth in the New Zealand list of teams. That would surprise me. But I understand why, because there's that much going on, and the New Zealand teams playing each other can knock the stuffing out. Crusaders are my real tip. I think they're going to be very strong. They've lost your mate Nadolo, who's taken off clearly, but they've picked up Tamana Valu from the Chiefs. Digby Ione's back. Richie Mwanga, and thanks to Artie in the Kahu team who was pointing out Richie for us. And Big Scott Barrett, who another, I think Darren Ormsby and a few others are saying, watch him this year because he's going to be a definite step up as that second row. We saw him for the All Blacks last year. Yeah. I think the thing for me on the Crusaders, though, and this is going to be one of my things to watch, is Kieran Reid. He gets a couple of weeks off at the start of the year, but as regular viewers know, I talked about him last year, and I don't know if he's going to be good enough for the All Blacks this year, if he's going to stay the way he's going. So he's got to have a big year, and they want him as captain, so I'm going to keep an eye on Kieran Reid. Highlanders strong, mobile pack. Lima Sapuaga's going to have a good chance to put his name out there. Fekatoa's a great super level player. They're going to be strong. And the Canes, of course, will be looking to go back to back. And the big one, a couple of big ones there, Nina Milner Scudder. I'm a big fan of Scudder. I'd have him in the All Blacks instead of Dag. So I'm really keen to see how he goes. I think he's going to bring a lot to that team, fresh, coming back from having been out injured. And Geordie Barrett, is he the tallest fly half in the world? He scored that great chip and chase in the Tens. But he's about 196 centimetres. Yeah. So you've got Bowden, Geordie and Scott. I think they're the Russian dolls of New Zealand rugby.
Well,
just the three different sizes.
We saw the mixed-up line out in the Scotland game. So maybe they're going to use that as a tactic too. He just jumps in there every now and then, number 2.
That's right. So overall, the New Zealand conference, strong throughout. The Blues halves maybe to keep an eye on. But the Crusaders, I really like the Crusaders.
Yeah, fair call.
Into Australia, the Brumbies. Now, they're pretty short and people like them. I'm not such a big fan. They've lost a bit of leadership in Moore and Pocock. I still don't know. Larkham, I think, is got the hallmarks of a good coach, but he hasn't convinced me yet that he has the team moving in the right way. Stephen Moore, Matt Tamua, Joe Tamani, all gone. David Pocock, sabbatical. Christian Lilofano, unfortunately, out ill. And Thomas Cabelli, their 9, who I like, did his knee before the year. They've got some good players in there, a strong tight 5, Rory Arnold, Sam Carter, Co Alatoa, Ben Alexander. But I think they're going to be mid-range at best. I just don't feel they're going to have enough depth.
Yeah, just stop banging the desk there, Benny.
I'm banging.
You're getting excited. The Brumbies never do well when they're seen as favourites.
Yeah.
And they sort of sneak up.
They like to battle.
Yeah, so I think that's not a good sign.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'll stop banging the desk, but the Force, not much good last year. I love Matt Hodgson. I think he's great to see him back and fit and playing.
Sean Byrne, the coaching staff.
Sean Byrne, the coaching staff. Your mate Tatafa, plotter now too, in at hooker. Dane Halaperi, Curtis Rona from the Bulldogs in rugby league, but not enough. They'll win a couple of games, but I would expect them to struggle again.
I don't mind. I think it's a good start for them.
Yeah. Rebels, they punched above their weight in the last couple of years. Yeah. Marika Korobidi, another rugby league convert on the wing. Reece Hodge, you've got to keep an eye on. Sean McMahon, Nick Sturzaka. They said they punch above their weight. They're going to need to again. Again, the depth in Australian rugby means these teams don't have a lot of fresh faces that we're that excited about.
Very intelligent coaching staff as well.
They do.
They will come to the fore, I think, in the crutch plays.
Now, the team to watch in the Reds, they've brought some older legs and heads back in. Stephen Moore, Quade Cooper, George Smith, Scott Higginbotham, if he gets through his issue off the field that we read about with his incident with the cops, getting a bit loose. So they're rebuilding on some old heads. They've re-signed Nick Frisby. They've got Carmichael Hunt, the former league player, AFL player. He looks really good. The Reds are a little bit of a question mark. I think they could go very well, but it's all going to be on how old those legs actually are as they get into the Super Rugby season with all the travel.
Big test for a good old friend of mine and a watcher or listener to RuggaMatrix is Nick Stiles, super coach, the former Australian in Queensland.
I like the look of him as a coach.
Yeah. He's done a lot of hard yards and he's really looked at the intellectual side of coaching. So I hope he goes really well. I have traditionally a soft spot and go for the Reds if you push me for my team.
Yeah.
But hopefully Nick goes well. So he's in charge of Queensland.
Yeah. Finally, the Waratahs, and Waratahs is my home team. I think it's a rebuilding year. I look at the squad, and there'll be a lot of talk around some of the players coming through. I like the look of this Ira Simeone, who's from North's club in Sydney.
Right, yeah.
But they've lost Kurtley Beale, Wycliffe Parley, Dave Dennis, Taff, Ben Robinson. There's places to be sorted out. I think Tolu Latu's probably lead on the hooker, but Fitzpatrick Roach, second row. I think they'll have a mixed year, and I think it's a year where they need to bring some of these younger players through and see how they go.
Out of South Africa, what's your pick there?
South Africa, the Bulls. I think the Bulls were a bit erratic last year. I think they're going to look better this year. Andre Pollard, back at 5'8", really talented player, and Lou Yaga from the Cheetahs. So, the Bulls, I think the Cheetahs will struggle. The Kings are a shambles. The Lions are pretty stable, and they've got a much better draw. This ridiculous Super Rugby draw we have means they dodged the New Zealand sides, who they knocked over last year. So the Lions are clearly going to be one to watch, but I think the Bulls. Sharks and Stormers, mid-table, there or thereabouts. And to wrap it up, the Jaguars should be better after a year under their belt. They've got a lot of Argentinian players who stick together. And the Sunwolves, I think, will be worse. They travel 130,000 kilometres a year. I think that's about 3 times around the earth. And they've struggled to get players. So, Sanzar, as they put this report together, they've really got to have a good hard look at how this works.
All right. So I think it's time to go to the Strike viewer comments of the week as we wind it up.
Absolutely. And as we said, please keep those comments coming in. I want to hear them. We want to read what you've got to say, and they help us make this show better. Some shout-outs this week. Sonny Amahiro and the Kahu team, as was Bill Fuller and Blair Emerson, who called out Tong and Thor. Sean McTaggart, who told us to keep an eye on Bryn Hall at the Crusaders, says he could really push to be a strong member of the AB squad at halfback there.
Knows his stuff, Sean.
Arda Ray, I mentioned before. Darren Ormsby's always in there. He's a big fan of the Barrett brothers. I want to say a big welcome to Alan Rutherford, who put me onto a Facebook group called WTF is Wrong with Australian Rugby.
What?
And I think they'd probably enjoy some of our shows from last year.
I'm on there.
Send
me a link.
Get in there.
I'm on there
because there's some good conversations going on in there questioning the
I might be able
Paul
to
checkers of the world
I might be able to
and
answer
where
a few
we are.
questions, actually.
Paulie Petalo, like the Blues backline. Hugh Galvin, Mike Wills, Seth Prescott. Greg Growden wants more close-ups. There you go, Growdy, old mate of ours. Shout out to Colin Townsend and Paul Galbraith. And the comment of the week for me, the viewer comment of the week came from Cody Reddy, who was one of our regulars last year. But after Canna was on the show last week, go back and have a look at the comments under show 233. Cody posted a picture of Brendan Cannon in an All Blacks jersey. It was an advertising campaign at the time, but go and have a look. It looked fantastic. So hopefully we'll make. I won't even show that on the show at some point. Good pick.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Great work putting all that together while I've been on the road. And the wonderful thing is you guys inspire us each week, and the comments are fantastic last week on the wake of Brendan Cannon's appearance, and he's back next show. He's really keen to get involved. You know what he's loving? He's loving the fact that he can talk to you guys in an environment that he doesn't get controlled by anyone else. So that's the best thing about it. All right, mate, we're going to wind it up. I'm on the road for the next couple of weeks. I've got stuff here and overseas, but we'll be back in 2 weeks' time. Ben's going to do a quick video.
I'll do a video next week, wrap up the Super Rugby round one.
Yeah, but then we'll be back.
It'll be a bit rawer than this beautiful environment, though.
We'll do a full-on wrap in the studio in 2 weeks' time, but hopefully we've given you some idea about what to look forward to in Super Rugby in the rest of Six Nations. Love it all. All right, mate, good to see you.
Thanks, mate. You too.
I'll see you in a couple of weeks' time. That is it for RuggaMatrix International. Don't forget to sign into our sponsor, strike.com.au. We've got more to come very soon. Until then, enjoy the start of Super Rugby, enjoy Six Nations, enjoy your rugby.